Okay. Hi. My name's Kimmy Brown Hill, and I'm wanting to share about La Sainte Chapelle and its stained glass specifically, and it's important to French culture and history, specifically to Paris. And I chose this topic because I really think it tied into um, the deep history and background of religion in Parisian history and culture. And let's see. Um, Also, in the readings, we learn a lot about the king that um, this chapel was built under, which is King Louis VI. And he was a very beloved king, as we learn in the textbook in Seven Ages of Paris. And he is later known in history as Saint Louis, and lots of different monuments and cities are named after him throughout the world, actually. And for example, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, so there's um, a direct connection. And so I also wanted to specifically focus on the stained glass because I've been there in person, and it's just such a marvel. The way that they were able to construct this chapel is amazing because most of the wall is stained glass in the upper chapel, and we'll later see how they were able to do that. But a lot of the um, sources I used to learn more about La Sainte Chapelle was through French resources, looking it up online in French. I was able to learn a lot more in depth than just English sites that were more touristy. Um, And I also used a pamphlet that I was given when I went that I had actually saved, and it was helpful for sure. Give a little bit more uh, personality to the history of the building itself, and the stained glass as it depicts the stories of the Old and New Testaments. And I just found it really helpful to stick to more of the French sites. Um, and so we'll go into the history. So it was constructed from 1242 to 1248. So this is a Gothic style. They named it Réunion, Gothic style. And when we look at the windows further back, it shows how honestly advanced the architecture was back then to be able to make this happen. The architect is unknown, but some historians believe that the chief architect was Pierre de Montreuil. And throughout the years, lots of the stained glass pieces have been destroyed or broken. So 2/3 of the pieces are original works, and then as they went in to restore throughout the years, they would just add piece by piece instead of changing out the entire panels. And something interesting is there are about 900,000 visitors each year. I thought that was a big number. important to mention. And we see on the right this window. It's Saint Louis and Robert d'Artois carrying the relics, the holy relics to Sainte Chapelle. And this is also along with the Old and New Testaments. Um, there's a panel that's dedicated entirely to Saint Louis, which is the reason why this chapel was built, is to house the holy relics that are no longer actually there. And this picture is another picture of the relics being brought to Sainte Chapelle. But continuing the history, there was two big fires, one in 1630 and again in 1776. And then in 1690, the stained glass windows were removed from the lower chapel because there was a flood in the Seine. And then the biggest damages that Sainte Chapelle had was during the French Revolution. But most of the stained glass windows they survived the French Revolution because they were removed and stored in huge filing cabinets as a way to preserve them. And then after that, it kind of, for about 100 years, Sainte Chapelle was just kind of left alone, and it came to a very awful state, but then it was restored in the 1800s and completed in 1855. And because of the lack of drawings and descriptions in the blueprint, the lower chapel was entirely reinvented, but the upper chapel is based on some of the drawings of the original building. And then also during both World Wars, the stained glass windows were completely dismantled and stored, since La Sainte Chapelle is right by the Concierge de Paris. So it's really a governmentally, politically charged area. And so now I want to talk about the lower chapel. It doesn't have a lot of stained glass, but it is because of the structure that the stained glass can be so big at the top. We can see how there's a lot of beams and those arches that support the delicate stained glass up on the upper chapel. And the entire lower chapel is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And so now this is the upper chapel. We can see how much taller it is, all of the stained glass all around. And there's almost 670 square meters of glass. That's a lot of glass. And a total of 15 panels. There are 1,113 distinct recites of the Old and New Testament. And then the stained glass only has 5 colors within them, which is blue, red, green, purple, and yellow. And throughout the stained glass and throughout the chapel, the entire Sainte Chapelle, we see the French flower, le fleur de lis, which is symbolic of French royalty. We can see it on the ceilings up there. It's hard to see from this picture, but those are all fleur de lis. And now we're going to go on to talk about the rose, which is opposite of this view. It's on the other side. So this was built a century or two after the original Sainte Chapelle was done. So this came in later. And we can especially tell because of how much green there is in this glass. The green color was brought in The technique was brought in the 15th century, and it didn't exist in the 13th century. It's in the style of flamboyant Gothic, and it was under the reign of Charles VIII that it was constructed for a total of 87 petals, and it represents the entire book of Apocalypse, where Christ comes back to the earth. And here is just an example of one of the petals. This is the pale horse representing death. In the book of Apocalypse, there's the four horsemen. They all represent conquest, war, famine, and death. And that's important to the story of Apocalypse. And I just really liked this detailed shot of the stained glass. You can see how much detail was put into it. It's not just pieces of glass together, like it looks like a drawing, which I think is so amazing. Now we'll move on to the panels themselves. There are 15 panels in all, as said before, and it goes in order. This is actually backwards, but you still get the idea. So O is Genesis, that's the beginning of the Old Testament, goes all the way to the New Testament, starting with G. Is it G? Or starting with, it's backwards, so I, Saint John and the childhood of Christ. In the middle is the Passion of Christ, and then it goes on to the history and holy relics. So the Passion of Christ, that's what's right in the middle of all of the stained glass, and it's it kind of highlights the focal, it brings a focal point to the Passion of Christ, which is the suffering and crucifixion of Christ. And here's a close-up of some of the details. You can see it on the far right panel, on the lower right. And here's another example of a close-up of the panel. This is Queen Esther. And Saint Louis wanted to have Queen Esther dedicated, these panels dedicated to his mother, Blanche de Castille, which we also read about her in the 7 Ages of Paris. And it's just the story of Queen Esther going to save her people, the Jews, from massacre. And so moving on to the importance of La Sainte Chapelle to Paris. So as I mentioned before, it was built with a purpose specifically to house the holy relics and artifacts that were purchased by Saint Louis, meaning the crown of thorns, the true cross, and other of those relics. The purpose of the stained glass, however, was to help those who couldn't read Latin or Greek Bibles. They could read the panels of the stories of the Bible without the help of the priest. And then continuing on today, the importance of Paris, some examples are they have concerts in La Sainte Chapelle because it is not a dedicated chapel. It's not used for mass or any other religious service. It's only a secular building. And so because of that, they can make use of the acoustics and have those concerts there. And then another really cool story I read was about the recent restoration work that was done about 10 years ago. They used lasers to clean up the stained glass windows because of 800 years of pollution had built up on the windows, as well as damage from wind and rain. And so they removed the pollution, and then they added an outside skin of glass to as an added protection and also stability to the stained glass. And that took a couple years to do because of how many panels and windows there are. And then I also think I'm going to go back to these panels. I think that we can see the fleur de lis in the panels, and then we see its richness, its details. And I honestly think that this has added a lot to the culture of France and specifically of Paris. We see this craftsmanship, this work of art being put on display, and it's something that you can be very proud of as a Parisian or French person to know that this work and craftsmanship was from your country. And I think the details and the colors, it all shows that attention to detail that Parisians have, and how the history is so rich in this chapel and in this stained glass we can see. And I was able to watch a couple of YouTube videos to just get more of a feel of the general attitude of the French towards La Sainte Chapelle. And although France has separated state from religion a long time ago, and this isn't technically a religious building because it's obviously has that religious background, but it's not used today as a religious place. Nevertheless, I still think that the Parisians have a deep respect for the Christian church and for the stories of the Bible. And we can see how they have worked really hard to preserve those buildings, especially this one, because they see that importance of this rich craftsmanship. And again, in those videos that I watched, you could see how how proud they were of this work, and how they really will do anything to preserve it because it is just such a work of art. And so to conclude, in researching this, I learned a lot about the historical and religious importance of this chapel de Paris. I mean, it's on the Ile de la Cité, it's right by Notre Dame, the Concierge, and like it's just in the heart of Paris, the heart of the Seine. And I also learned about all of the years of change, destruction, and restoration that the chapel has gone through, and specifically the stained glass has been through. Looking back at how they incorporated the green colors into the older stained glass, or I should say newer stained glass. And next, I really hope that my audience, those who watch this presentation, will really find appreciation for this chapel, because I can talk on and on about how beautiful the stained glass is, but really you just have to go and see it. It really is like something worth stopping by and walking into, especially on a sunny day when all of the light comes through the windows. And it truly is awe-inspiring. And then lastly, the in-depth study of the city of Paris that we've done has really expanded my perspective and my appreciation for Paris because, um, as I mentioned in class before, it's sort of like I grew up with Paris and I grew up with this incredible city and capital. And I knew that it was old and I knew that it was rich in history, but I didn't know um, truly how old it was. Like, I didn't really let that sink in. And in reading about all the different kings and monarchies and all of the different names of the people who put work into this city and the architects and so on and so forth. Especially, I think Usman. Um, I've been able to see all of the working hands and the people that added to this incredible city. And with those people comes like their stories as well, their life's work, and the impact that they've left behind, even after leaving this earth and Paris. And I just think like that richness is so amazing, and I'm really glad I took this class, and I'm glad I had this opportunity to go in depth on the stained glass of La Sainte Chapelle. And yeah, here are my sources. Again, I used a lot of French sources. I used a few American sources for some of the specific stories of the World War II, how they stored the panels in the files, that sort of thing. Um, and then I also have the pamphlet that I got at Sainte Chapelle. And yeah, thank you.